Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
And welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. A lot of focus, and rightly so, on the Canadian election. We're going to talk about that in future podcasts. But we would be remiss if we didn't at least comment about some of the insanity that's been going on south of the border over the last couple of days with Donald Trump and tariffs and counter tariffs and taking tariffs on and off, and the stock market and the economy starting to crash down in the States. When stuff of that magnitude starts happening to the United States, not just because they're our neighbor to the south, but also the driving country, the driving economy in the world these days, the global economy, of course it's going to have an impact on us. And it's certainly having an impact on the Canadian election. We'll get into that a little bit later on. But I'm flabbergasted to see not just what Trump is doing, but the reaction to what Trump is doing. And I see the result on social media, and I see some people just plain outraged on social media. And I'm sure you've seen some of the comments about his behavior and some of the actions, and saying he should be impeached again. Why not? First of all, that's not going to happen. Okay, let's just lay that to rest. Or he should be kicked out of office, or they should invoke that clause that says he's not mentally capable. He's got as much time as he wants to get anything done, and the reason why is because he and his MAGA people, not just Trump, but his MAGA people, they control all the switches, everything that goes on, all the checks and balances in the Constitution, from the Supreme Court to other institutions within the Congress and the Senate, are all controlled by MAGA people. So that's just not going to happen. That somebody's going to stand up and say, okay, fine, we got to take this guy down, or we got to get rid of him, because everything is voted along party lines, which is not unusual in politics. But MAGA is a different animal. I mean, there's a cult element to what's going on with MAGA. It doesn't matter if Trump screws up. It doesn't matter if it's obvious to everybody that he's lied. They simply believe it, and they simply say, okay, now it's our job to go and sell the lie. Whether they believe it or not is inconsequential. I know that's a pretty scary situation, but that's what exists these days. And I think we have to accept that reality. But more importantly, the American people have to understand that reality too, that they're stuck with the situation. And I know we can continue to look in the rearview mirror and say, yeah, well, they could have done something about it last November in the election, and they didn't. That's true to a large extent, but it is what it is, and it's what we have to deal with, and it's what the Americans have to deal with right now. And it's pretty frightening when you see the sorts of things that are going on, especially, and we'll go back to about a week or so ago with the institution of these new sets of tariffs. And you probably saw, if not the whole media conference last week, at least snippets of it, I guess, on news or on social media. There was Trump in the Rose Garden of the White House. He's got these big charts that talking about tariffs this and tariffs that, and we're going to impose this and we're going to get this. And it was done in such an arbitrary and disheveled fashion. And we found out later on, even from some of the people that were involved in composing some of this stuff, that it was done in a very arbitrary manner. I mean, most of the numbers that are on there were simply made up because they don't have the data to actually substantiate any of the things that are going on. And that's frightening, that, policies that are going to have an impact on just about every other country in the world are being developed and manufactured in that fashion. But again, that's what it is. But the repercussions of this are worldwide. And then, of course, we saw the economy crash, lowest point it's ever had. And then all of a sudden, Trump decides, just after time and time and time again in that 7-day period, saying, I'm not going to rescind these tariffs. They're going to stay in place. The market continued to crash. And then all of a sudden, bing. And they had one of the biggest days in history, in the market history in the States. And of course, Trump wants to take credit for it. But as one of my friends said, look, if somebody holds you over the edge of a cliff and you're about to fall and then he pulls you back, he didn't save your life. He tried to kill you. And that's what Trump was doing with the economy. He tried to kill it. And the only reason that he decided to rescind those tariffs was because obviously when the market crashed and then all of a sudden it rebounds, those people, his outer circle, the billionaires that have supported him, they all got richer, even more rich, including Elon Musk. They talked for the first part of that week about all the financial losses that they made. But you saw Trump sent out a tweet about 3 or 4 hours before he rescinded the tariff, said this would be a good day to buy. Well, that was like a sign to all of his people and all his supporters. I'm about to do something which is going to make the stocks go firing back up again. So go ahead and buy now. And many of them did. And many of them got wealthy. It's manipulation of the stock market. And I think even on a philosophical basis, but even on more so on a legal basis, the fact that Donald Trump as president feels that he can control tariffs and all the levers that they're going to have an impact on the markets, and he benefits and his friends benefit from that, it's downright wrong, and it's illegal. Martha Stewart years ago went to jail for what Trump and his cronies have been doing right now, for a far less egregious offense than what these guys are doing. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars here. And he's doing it right in front of the faces of the American people and getting away with it. And it's not unusual, and it's not surprising, because just about everything else that he does, which is outrageous, in some cases illegal, he gets away with. The ICE police officers who are simply going in there and taking people in the middle of the night, sometimes banging on doors and taking people in handcuffs, and although many of them being transferred to an El Salvador prison, there's some independent research was done, of course, by some of the media down there, and found out that about 75% of the people that have been taken away and detained in this prison have no criminal record, no record of any criminal activity at all. Yet still, there they are. Are they political prisoners? It sure looks like it. So, of course, there was an attempt to try to approach the Supreme Court to say, look, this is illegal. We have due process laws here. And John Roberts, the head of the Supreme Court down there, simply said, no, he's okay to do that. He's supposed to be the one offering checks and balances. Yet the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, as he has done so many times in the past, simply gives Donald Trump the free card and say, go ahead and do what you want, notwithstanding the fact that there seems to be an illegality to it. You're in a special circumstance. It's really frightening to see what's happening. And if you're frustrated by this, imagine how many of the American people feel, not just the ones who didn't vote for Trump. We're hearing from an awful lot of people who did vote for Trump that have said, look, I'm sorry. I wish I could take back my vote, but you can't. Now you're stuck with the situation. And as I say, the chances of anything happening from a legal standpoint, again, whether you want to talk about impeachments or any other levers that they may want to pull here, it's just not going to happen. The point of reference I want to try to maybe drive the point home. I remember the Watergate scandal back in the early 1970s. It was one of the first things I covered as a young pup journalist to try to cover this. And I remember sitting there for hours watching it on TV, writing notes and filing stories about what was going on. And Nixon was a bad guy. And we all know his involvement in the Watergate scandal and the cover-up and the missing minutes of the tape, of course, and from his office, the dirty tricks, the enemies lists. I mean, it was all ugly stuff. And it was shocking to an awful lot of American people to think that something like that was actually going on in the White House. But notwithstanding that, once the American Congress started to investigate what happened with Watergate, it was Democrats and Republicans. And in the early stages of that, it did pretty much fall on party lines. And the characterization was, well, those Democrats are just out to get a Republican president. But as more evidence was presented, and more people came forward to testify, former legal counsel John Dean and so many others, it became blatantly obvious to the members of the committee, the Watergate committee in Congress, that this guy had to go. And it was that moment, it was the Republican senators and congressmen that actually approached Nixon at that time and said, we don't have you back anymore. You've screwed up here badly. You've ruined our Constitution. You got to go. And it's at that point that he resigned, so he didn't have to face the impeachment. But it was people like Howard Baker and Lowell Weicker and a couple of other Republicans who were on that committee that simply said, look, we can't do this anymore. Well, with that historical context, look at what's happening right now. Can you really foresee that anybody of this MAGA crowd in either the Senate or the Congress down there would actually turn about and say, okay, Trump, you got to go? Is Jim Jordan going to do that? Is the Speaker of the House going to do that? Is anybody going to do that? No, of course not, because they are loyal to a fault as cult members to say and do anything it takes to please Donald Trump. They don't have the backbone, the political courage, no, probably the willpower, maybe not even the desire to do that sort of thing. So there doesn't seem to be anybody with the fortitude to simply say we have to do something about this. They're facing a constitutional crisis right now. And we don't know how this is going to end. What we do know, of course, is that it's going to have an impact on what's going to be happening here in Canada, not just in the short term with our election in just a couple of weeks, but in the long term, too, economically, trade deals. There's so many other things going on, defense spending. It's all throwing into the same basket right now. And it was all, in past generations, all premised on the fact that there was a working relationship between Canada and the U.S. that, yes, we're going to have our differences, and sometimes we're going to have our little spats, and we're going to hold our breath and wait for, because you're not doing something the way we want, and vice versa. And we've had prime ministers that didn't get along with presidents. That happens. That's not unusual for that to happen. But in spite of all of those concerns, we still had the basis for a strong relationship and maintain that. That's off the table now because of Trump and what he's done, not just to Canada, but to the rest of the world. But we want to focus on what's going on here. This is our country, and we're the ones that are going to have to deal with what's going on here. And it's sad for those of us that have seen this past relationship since Confederation, really. Notwithstanding the fact that, we were bitter enemies, the War of 1812, etc. But we got along, and we prided ourselves. How many times as you went through school did you hear about the longest undefended border in the world between Canada and the U.S.? Trump wants to erase that line. You've seen that. He wants us to become part of the United States. But even if that doesn't happen, the animosity that seems to be developing right now, and that seems to be the foundation of our relationship right now, and the acrimony that's going on is insurmountable. And, Prime Minister Carney's already said that, look, at the way we used to do business with the States, the relationship we had is over. He wasn't saying, hey, we're never going to deal with these guys again. Of course, we have to, but it's different. I mean, when somebody stabs you in the back time and time and time again, at some point you're going to say, I can't trust these people anymore. And that's where we are right now. And it's a sad circumstance. But what we're looking for, just to tie it back into what I was talking about at the beginning of the podcast, is in just a few days on April 28th, we as Canadians are going to make a decision about just what we can do about this and who we want to lead us going forward in this. And it's going to be very important. And I got my card, my election card, my voter card in the mail today, finally. Hopefully you will too. And there's a big readout here about exactly where the advanced polls are, where you can vote, etc. And that's the takeaway. That's the end of this. So if you want to finish the podcast on a relatively optimistic note, you can vote. And you can make a difference, and you can have your voice heard. And there's a lot of countries in the world right now that just don't offer that privilege, that right to their citizens. We've got it here. So let's use it and make the best of it, okay? We'll talk about that in the next podcast. That's all for today. Thanks so much for being with us. As always, you can catch our podcasts on Substack, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, of course, and on Blue Sky. I always look forward to your feedback on this, too. We were running around with the idea in the last couple of days here about maybe doing a Q&A on election night or very close to election night. Let us know what you think about that idea, if you'd take part in something like that, if you'd be interested in us doing a Q&A and answering some questions and having some dialogue back and forth like that. You know how to reach us. Our email address and other contact information, of course, is on our page. All right. Check it out, and we'll talk about that in future podcasts as well. Don't forget, though, April 28th, Election Day here in Canada. That's it for the podcast. I'm Bill Kelly. Until next time, stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wissenz Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wissenz Law, 905-522-1102 or wissenslaw.com.